Hi, I'm Dave Leopold, Director of Strategic Development at LucidLink, and I'm here today speaking with Joanna Naugle, the editor of the award-winning FX series, The Bear. You're also co-owner of Senior Post here in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the making of the show, Season 1, Season 2. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Excited to be here and chat about things.
So it's a fantastic show. It has its own feel. It has its own pace, a real intensity to it. So Season 1, you were in the pandemic,
Yep.
all remote.
Correct.
Season 2, you were coming back together. Can you talk a bit about how long it takes to make an episode, what that process is, and how you interact with other people on the Post team?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so the first season, we were primarily doing it in 2022 and we were still remote, and it was great because we started Post right when they were filming in Chicago. So we were only like a day behind them with dailies. So they'd be shooting and then literally the next morning we'd have the footage and we'd get to dig in right away. So it was really great to have that workflow because we could kind of be talking to the people on set a bit. And if we were like, we need more B-roll of people chopping vegetables, or we need more B-roll of the crew cleaning up, or more just like Chicago skyline footage, they could still go out and get that because we were mostly in one location. They knew a lot of places that had beautiful exteriors that we could use, and therefore it made it really seamless. We had exactly what we needed in order to put the episodes together. So it was a really quick turnaround. Both seasons we did all the episodes in about like 3 to 4 months. So, wow. And that's including production. So yeah, we were working pretty much throughout the entire production. We started this past season in like February of 2023, and then it came out at the end of June. So very quick turnaround for 10 episodes. But at this point, I feel like we're a very well-oiled machine. A lot of the same team from Season 1 came back, and so we were able to just dive in. We had already established the pace of the show, the tone of the show, introduce the characters. So it was really fun to just get a little deeper with everyone, kind of build out everyone's backstory a little bit more, and then see them build something new together.
That's great. And so the team that you were working with, you have another editor, and you have some assistant editors. Where's everyone located?
Yeah, so the seasons are primarily edited by myself and Adam Epstein, who's a fabulous editor. I've known him for years, and we just work really well together. The assistant editors are primarily scattered around Brooklyn. We have some of our team in like upstate New York, like just outside the city. Last season, one of our AEs was in LA for part of the time, so that's probably the furthest that we've been. And then this season, we also had an editor helping us out for one of the episodes in Chicago. So she was a little bit more like on the ground. She was interacting a little bit more with the production team, kind of kicked off an edit on one of the episodes and then handed it over to me, which worked out great because she was able to get kind of real-time feedback before I kind of took it over and kept the ball rolling in Brooklyn.
And how long do you usually have before you have your editor's cut from the moment you get your dailies?
The editor's cut is very fast. We usually get the dailies, I'd say the episode ends, like they finish shooting it, and then we have the cut 2 or 3 days later. So we're definitely trying to keep up with the footage as it's coming in, and then once everything shoots, I try to almost be up to date with the scenes so that by the time they're done shooting, I'm just doing the final scenes, and then it's a little bit of like putting it all together, making those first music selections, making it feel like an episode. But I try not to be too precious with the first cut because I'm just giving it my best first shot, and then I can't wait to get the conversation going with the director, with the showrunner, with the producers, and then obviously FX will turn it into the final product, which is way better than anything I do on my own.
Well, so they say that, you know, an edit is the final rewrite of a script. I know that there is a lot of fluidity in how this story is told, not just within one episode, but sometimes you move things from one episode to another. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the great thing about working in Adobe Productions and with LucidLink is we have everything shared. So a lot of times Adam and I are communicating about, oh, this scene will actually be better in this episode. And obviously the producers are weighing in on this too. We're not making executive decisions, but everyone decides like, oh, this scene would be better in this episode. And it's as easy as just opening up a project, opening up a bin, grabbing that and bring it into, you know, whatever sequence you're working on. So we had a couple of things this season that we saw in multiple different episodes before it found its home. We also have so many flashbacks and like panic attacks that happen throughout the season. As anyone who watches the show knows, it's kind of one of our signature stylistic choices. So being able to be like, okay, what would Carmi be thinking about in this moment when he's trapped in the fridge? We were pulling stuff from season 1. We were actually pulling footage that didn't even make it into the pilot, but we added to that scene. So it's like taking a little bit of the different memories of the characters and having them kind of play in their heads can really create this like very visceral reaction.
Oh, that's so interesting that you were using footage that never made it into the pilot and using that as the flashback. That's really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess the fact that you have this accelerated timetable that, deadlines and trying to get your cuts done as quickly as possible, that when you're working side by side with someone, even if it's remote, it gives you that ability to have that discussion because you're working on episodes in tandem.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Like that's one of my favorite things about editing TV is just the team aspect of it. And especially with Adam, it's so fun to be like, okay, I'm cutting the first 2 episodes. He's cutting episode 3. It's almost like handing off the baton and being like, okay, I can't wait to see how he moves the story forward, and then I'll take it back, and just seeing the choices he makes and then applying them to other things. And then it's great because Chris Storr, the creator of the show, Joanna Naugle, Josh Sr., like the creative producers who are weighing in, they'll notice something about one episode and say, oh, actually, this worked really well. Let's apply it here as well. So with them kind of having the overarching bird's eye view of the season, then Adam and I can go in and try to mirror each other's episodes in some ways, but also make sure they feel different for each character. Like in season 2, there's definitely like Sydney's episode or Richie's episode or Marcus's episode, and each of those has a little bit of a different like visual language and editing style and pace as well.
Now, a lot of the time when people think about editing, they're really thinking about picture editing. But so much of this show really starts with the audio.
Yes.
There's a lot of overlapping dialogue. There's incredible music selections. Let's start with the dialogue. Can you talk about just what is that like? How many tracks do you get? How do you weed through it and figure out what we should be listening to at any given moment? And sort of that initial mix that you present for your editor's cut?
We spend a lot of time on the temp mix and the temp sound design, just because, like you said, it's so crucial to creating the environment of the show. In season 1, the beef had a very specific sound, and you could always hear the L train going by. You always heard the garbage truck in the alley. You always heard Richie screaming off screen if you're not seeing him on camera. And then in season 2, it was a lot more of construction and the sound of tearing something down and building something new. We also go to a lot of new locations in season 2. What does Copenhagen sound like? What do the streets of Chicago sound like? What does an insane Christmas dinner sound like 5 years ago? So yeah, we really try to build up the environment to make sure that the audience feels so immersed and like they're just sitting next to a character and they're completely in the space with them. So yeah, I think as editors, we don't want to show a cut without having at least one step in the right direction. And we have an amazing team at Sound Lounge who does the final mix, and they've commented that we usually give them a good start on what we're imagining it to sound like, because yeah, if you want the audience to have a visceral reaction, which a lot of times we do, sound is just one of those tools in our toolkit. And yeah, sometimes we get 12 tracks of audio and there's lots of people talking over each other, and we lean into that and even look for pauses that we can remove just so it feels like everyone is everyone is yelling over each other and also has this familiarity, like we really want to make you believe that these people have known each other for years. They feel comfortable yelling over each other, and that's just the way that they communicate, for better or for worse.
And as far as the sort of the crosstalk element, that's one of the things that really makes some of these performances so authentic, is it's not somebody waiting for someone else to finish a line and then you come in, but when it comes to the actual production, how much of that crosstalk is actually happening in the moment, and what are the challenges that come with people talking over each other in the middle of a take?
Definitely. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm cutting just for audio clarity, I guess you'd say, and just to make sure that, you can hear those lines, because there are some times that I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even realize they were saying this line because everyone's speaking over each other. So I think really zeroing in on what are the priority lines, and then if we have them clean somewhere else, sometimes we'll sneak in, an aside that someone makes, or Maddie, who plays Fac, will have a very funny improv that we'll try to sneak in, and just trying to make those moments feel natural, even if we're kind of cobbling them together sometimes. But at the end of the day, I always try to edit for performance. So if the take is amazing and the performance is there, it's amazing what they do in the post-sound stages where they can make things work, and you can lean into a take that maybe doesn't sound perfect, but with ADR or with finding other takes that are cleaner, someone talking off screen, you can preserve like those best, most amazing performance moments.
And is there a lot of ADR to reconstruct things so that you can maintain those performances?
There's a fair amount, but I'd say a lot of times the ADR is like jokes that we want to like highlight and stuff. So it's usually not like rewriting things. It's just like, oh, if there's too much overlap and we really want to lean into something being clear and like making that moment count, then we'll kind of go back in ADR. But for the most part, for a show that is as loud and overlapping as it is, the production sound team does an amazing job because we can hear a lot of it right off the bat, which I don't know exactly how they do it, but it's a feat.
It's pretty incredible.
It really is, yeah.
Now, on the music side, music plays such a big role in the series itself, and it really takes you along through the journey of everything the characters are going through, everything the restaurant itself is going through, which parallels the characters. What is the process for the music? Where do those selections come from to begin with?
So the music supervisors on the show are Chris Storer, the creator of the show, and Josh Senior, who's one of the EPs. And at the beginning of every season, they'll give us a playlist that's everything, so many different genres: jazz, rock, rap, movie scores, just Christmas music, a whole bunch of different things. And they're like, this is the sonic world of the Bear. And so one of the first things we'll do is have the assistant editors pull all those tracks, put them on Lucid Link, and that becomes our library for the season. And anyone can draw from it. And sometimes they're really specific about the music that's used in a scene. Like I remember I really liked one of the songs this season, Glass, Concrete, and Stone, and I put it in an early episode, and they were like, no, that's for episode 7. And I was like, okay, got it. So sometimes I have a very specific idea of where the music goes, and sometimes it takes a little bit of trial and error to find it. I had like a Pretender song that I used, I think, in like 4 different episodes before it found its home in episode 8. So it's really fun to have like a starting point, because sometimes it's literally written into the script. We're hearing The Show Must Go On by Bruce Hornsby, like as everyone's packing up the restaurant, or sometimes we're finding it after a couple of different rounds of, okay, this is closer, but we need something with a little more energy, or this isn't the right vibe. And what was really cool this season too is for the episode that was very specific to Sydney, we used some music suggestions from Io Adebari, the actress. So there was some music she was listening to as she was like living in Chicago for the show. Same thing with Lionel, who plays Marcus. He had a playlist he was listening to in Copenhagen, so we used some of that music as he's exploring the city. So I think that also helped feel more authentic to the characters, and Chris and Josh loved that, so we leaned into that a bit more too.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. I haven't heard of anyone doing that before, where you take the actors' playlists and incorporate that.
Yeah.
Do you find that there are times when you end up with tracks that were never in the mix to begin with? Like a last-minute ad where you're just searching for something and you finally find it, but it wasn't necessarily part of the inspiration playlist?
Yeah, I think especially in the episode 6, the Christmas episode, I think we started with a lot more Christmas music, and then Chris Storer really liked this idea of having more upbeat music as so much chaos was going on. So he and Josh picked a lot of lighter music, like George Harrison songs, or like the Beach Boys, the Bodines, and so finding that, putting that underneath all the craziness that was going on, had this really cool juxtaposition of everyone's melting down, but you have this really kind of like eerie, upbeat music in the background. So I think that shifted a little bit from just like doing that repeated beat of like, we all know what Christmas music sounds like, let's also have it advance the story a little bit more and create this like uneasy tension of, okay, things sound happy, but they are anything but happy in this moment.
So in season 1, you were working purely remote. Everyone was remote for that. Mm-hmm. How did you keep up with the pace of your edit schedules and how it coincided with production?
Yeah, so we were basically one day behind production. So they would shoot, we'd get the dailies, we'd put them on Lucid Link, and then immediately we'd be able to dive in through Adobe Productions. And because the schedule was so tight, that was really the only way that we could do it and make our deadlines. So yeah, being able to have all of the media in one place that we could all access immediately was essential to keeping things moving, keeping things on track, and so helpful because we could have the assistant editors going in and organizing things, making those multicam sequences, sharing them with us, and then immediately just say, okay, I'm out of this project, you can hop into it. We're all looking at the same media, so there was no need to reconnect, there was no need to share hard drives, there was no need to be like, oh, I downloaded the sound effects file, now it's here, that's where the music lived, that's where the VFX lived, the sound effects, and just having that as the home-based storage made everything so much more seamless.
So in the early days of the pandemic, no one really knew how to function. The old ways of working just weren't an option anymore. What was that transition like into the new way of working? How did you find your footing?
It was really hard to transition to a remote working environment so suddenly during the pandemic. Like I remember leaving during the middle of a show and we were like, we're gonna work from home for 2 weeks. And then obviously 3 years later, a lot of our work is still remote. And in the early days, it was a lot of mirroring drives, making sure everybody had the same information, and you would spend half your day just media managing because you opened up a project and something was offline, and then you had to figure out where this sound effect came from, or I downloaded this song as an MP3, but it should have been a WAV file. And so we spent so much time just making sure that we could do the fun part of our jobs, that there wasn't much time left to actually be cutting and collaborating. So once we started using LucidLink, it was so much easier to have that shared workspace, have everything in one space, and focus on the fun parts of our job, which is getting able to actually edit, share cuts back and forth. And yeah, it's just so great to be able to open up a project file, see what Adam or what Meg has been doing, and then keep the ball rolling, and then pass it back and say, check this out, I did something kind of cool, what do you think? And then, yeah, just put our brains together and make something really cool all together.
And then season 2, you didn't have to be remote, but did you do more of a hybrid?
Yeah, season 2, we did a hybrid of remote and in-person, and we were able to use LucidLink from home while everybody was in Chicago shooting, work on our editor's cuts, give feedback remotely. And then in the second half of the season, everybody came into the offices at Senior Post, and we were able to finish out the season together. So we were still using LucidLink, it was just we were changing between locations. And it was great because if someone was like, oh, I want to work from home today, you could do that without having to do a lot of adjustments. You could just hop in from whatever station you were working on. So it made it really easy to work around everyone's schedules, and then when the time came when it was helpful to collaborate and push this thing over the finish line, we could be there in person without having to create a whole new workflow. We were just using what we had set up from the beginning.
So on the show, especially season 1, you spend so much time in the kitchen. So I think it's only appropriate. I'd love to ask you some questions about specific episodes in season 2, but if you'll follow me, let's go into the kitchen and we'll talk there.
Sounds good.
Great.
Yes, chef.
All right.
Correct.
So I figure let's put us in a kitchen, make it a little familiar.
Definitely.
And because it is a real kitchen, we actually have the sounds of a kitchen, so you don't need to layer those in afterwards.
I feel right at home. Yeah.
In episode 3, Sunday, Sydney is trying to find inspiration for the new menu. She's going around Chicago, trying all this incredible looking food.
Yes.
And there's a montage. Now, montages are such a key part of the storytelling in this series, but there's this one montage where Sydney is trying to come up with what a new dish could be. And it's really incredible because a lot of the time we see characters doing work in montages, but we don't often see what their thought process is. What's the creative process of showing someone else's creative process?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so that episode was one of our more abstract episodes, and there was another editor actually who did the first cut. Her name's Naya. She's so talented, and it was really fun to be able to see what she had made. It was almost like a long documentary, and there was a lot of like interviews, and then we basically kept condensing the episode down further and further during the editing process, and really wanted to make the two focal points, these two montages. One is Sydney going around the city, trying a whole bunch of different dishes, talking to other chefs, and then afterwards, her like interior montage is what we were saying, the inspiration montage, where she's taking in everything around her and having inspiring images pop up that she connects between, you know, those long towers, the like corncob towers as they're affectionately called in Chicago, looking like ravioli, and kind of having those flashes. So I was really looking for match cuts and like the snow falling down paired with like the Parmesan cheese. So we really tried to use the footage that was like a black background, like a black plate, as like her mind. So anything we were seeing was like, you know, this like staged, beautiful footage of what she imagined the dish could be, and then trying to find match cuts that motivated that between the things she was seeing versus what was in her head. And then of course the episode ends with her trying to make the dish and it's not fully realized, and realizing this is a process everyone goes through as a creative person. I will imagine how perfect the episode looks in my head, and it never comes out that way on the first cut.
Sure.
But after a lot of rounds and thinking about, oh, this scene reminds me of this other thing I cut 2 years ago, and this music that I was listening to made me think about cutting it this way. So it's really trying to be true to the idea that inspiration can come from lots of different sources, and the final product is going to take a lot of time to get there, and you have to be open to what's around you in order to, have an idea evolve into what the final product will be.
That's so cool. And when you cut a montage like that, is there any structure given to you, or do you just start with that blank slate, that black plate, and layer on top of it and see where it takes you?
Yeah, I mean, we had the script to start with, but even the script was just like Sydney flashes through all of these different things and was almost more of a list at a certain point of she's thinking about her childhood, she's thinking about the dish that she made, the short rib dish from season 1, she's thinking about color palettes and Pantone colors. So there was definitely some direction on where to start, but there wasn't a lot of specifics about how long we should be on everything, are we flashing between them, and I didn't know exactly what footage they were going to get from the architecture boat tour, so there was a little bit of trial and error figuring out what are the things that when together elicited that response of, oh, I see the connection and I see how her brain is working as your brain is also putting these things together. So there was a couple of like layers to it, but we cut that sequence to a couple of different songs before landing on the song that was in there, and it just worked so perfectly.
It's beautiful.
We were just like, I sent it to Chris Storer and Josh Senior, and they were like, oh, this is it, this is what is going to bring us that connection and have that same empathy with what she's going through creatively.
Yeah, because it really does put you in her mind.
Definitely.
And you see her thought process as she's going through all these things. In the episode Fishes,
Yes.
again, putting yourself into the place of the characters, this was more, I felt like a very uncomfortable additional family member in the corner, just sort of watching all this. This is the Christmas episode. It's a flashback. It's also the longest episode of the season. But it has such intensity that's carried throughout the entire episode, and every frame is just packed with visuals, with people, the audio again overlaid. How do you maintain that kind of it's claustrophobic, it's intense, it's emotional. How do you bring that all together in such an episode?
Yeah, there's so many moving parts to making you feel like you were in that Berzatto household, and like you said, like maybe you're sitting in that extra chair at the table just like, how do I get out of this? This is so stressful. So there's so many different things we could play with. We had music, and almost every single scene in the episode has music underneath. Sometimes it's more quiet or less quiet. There's only 3 scenes that are completely silent, and those are the scenes that are the most emotional or the most intimate, and the final dinner scene. And on top of that, we just tried to have sound under every single moment. So whether or not someone is speaking, normally someone is yelling or speaking. We had wild track of the actor speaking on set as well, so we just layered that into almost every scene, so you could constantly hear another conversation happening in the next room. You just wanted to constantly feel like you were distracted by something else going on. And I just shortened any pause between 2 people talking, so they already were layering their dialogue a lot, and I pushed that even further and just making it feel like the most claustrophobic nightmare holiday dinner, and just amping that up throughout the entire episode until it obviously explodes with Donna's car coming through the wall. But you wanted that to feel like, okay, all right, it's getting crazier, and then that one moment needs to just feel like the explosion it was. The way that episode was shot was it was mostly roaming cameras, so a lot of times it wasn't just like, as you're saying, it's still single. It would be drifting past Richie, who's sitting next to Tiffany, who's sitting next to Uncle Jimmy. So you're constantly getting a sense of place and seeing how everybody is, one, reacting to how uncomfortable it is, and 2, how their evolution throughout the episode is showing that everyone has their own history with all the characters that are here and is bringing their own kind of uncomfortability and tension and predisposed ideas to what's going to happen. And I love editing like scenes that are around a dinner table. I've done a few in other shows, and I always go back as a reference to the first episode of the 2nd season of Fleabag, which almost entirely takes place at a dinner table, and they do such a good job with reaction shots. So I tried to do the same thing in the final dinner scene at Fishes, where you're almost never on a character for a full line. You're almost always seeing somebody react. As John Mulaney's giving the final grace, during the meal, you're watching Sugar, who's watching Carmi, who's watching Donna, who's watching Michael. Everyone's just constantly checking in on each other, checking the temperature of the room, and you just can feel it boiling, and something bad is going to happen, and
until
then it does.
Right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the roaming camera stuff has to take a lot of choreography. In season 1, episode 7, that was actually all done in one continuous take.
Correct, yes.
Sometimes called a oneer.
Yep.
First of all, that was incredibly impressive and kept that energy going for the entire thing. In season 2, the episode 10, the final episode, it starts with I think it was about 12 minutes
Exactly, yeah,
without
yeah.
without a cut. And so I'm watching that going, they're going to do it again. They're going to do it again. But then there is a cut and the tone changes a little bit, but the intensity actually increases as opposed to normally a cut would diffuse things.
Exactly.
At what point did they tell you that you should be cutting there? And how does that affect your creative choices?
Sure, yeah. So for the finale, it was always scripted when we would be cutting away, so they
Okay.
knew exactly kind of when that would stop. And the way that they described it to me, I thought was just so brilliant. Chris and Josh and Joanna, the creative team behind the show, were basically like, okay, it should feel like the audience should think we're going to do the same thing we did in season 1, where it's all one take, we're going in and out of the kitchen, and things are kind of slowly going out of control and getting more and more intense, and you're like, oh wait, they still haven't cut, I think they're going to do the same thing. And then there's a world where that could have continued and things kind of like continue going off the rails. Carmi's in the fridge, everyone's yelling at each other, and then Sydney and Richie kind of snap out of it, they take control of the situation. So that's what the motivating cuts are. So it's kind of like they're changing the energy, and all of a sudden they're like, you know what, we're not going to let this happen again. Then they, snap out of it. They're like, we have 5 minutes to get this back on track, and that's when we start this really insane montage that I spent a lot of time on with all the different B-roll of the different dishes. Everyone starts like syncing together. Sugar comes in and helps, and everyone's just like firing on all cylinders, and it's a real win for everyone in the team, except for Carmi, of course, who's locked in a freezer. But for everyone else, it's this moment of coming together, and the cuts kind of symbolize them getting their act together, communicating well, and everyone kind of bringing what they've learned from the season into this final moment where they knock it out of the park, which is a great feeling for everyone.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with us, telling us a little bit about what it takes to make this show. And honestly, I just can't wait for the next season. I can't get enough of this.
Thank you guys, and thank
Yeah.
you, Lucid Link. And yeah, it's been really fun talking about the show.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna.